Hello and welcome back to Spy Hard's podcast. I'm Agent Scott.
And I'm Cam the Provocateur, hitting the pedal to the metal.
And we are here with your first SpyMaster interview of the year 2023. Cam, who do we have joining us?
Yes, we are talking to J.D. Zeik, the screenwriter behind Ronin, the 1998 spy thriller starring Robert De Niro and directed by John Frankenheimer.
This is a fan favorite film, and we're thrilled to have JD on the show to help us break it down. So without further ado, strap yourselves in. We're going for a ride. Cam, hit it. And joining us on the show now, it is the screenwriter for 1998's smash hit spy film Ronin. It is Mr. J.D. Zeik. Hello, J.D. How are you doing?
I am doing very well. Very nice to meet you guys. Thanks for asking me to be here. I don't know, by the way, that it was a smash hit. I think it was a what's the French phrase? A success d'estime. Like it made its money back. It got really good reviews, but where it was successful, like really successful, was on DVD. I can swear on this podcast, right? Like,
go for it.
I swear way too much, but it just made a shit ton of money on DVD. I got lucky. It came out on DVD right when the DVD was exploding, and people were buying them to sort of have a library of DVDs until, then at some point everybody went, wow, I have all these DVDs. I never watched them. And now I stream everything.
Well, it's a smash hit in our hearts, at least. But you look at the reaction today, for instance. I put a tweet out asking for questions when we're speaking to you, and I've been inundated with questions. So we have a lot to discuss. There's a fan base for this film, so maybe the box office wasn't great, but...
And by the way, let me say, I'm really proud of it, and it's really become a cult thing, that I know. I've gotten emails from people in like Uzbekistan going, I really like your movie, and I'm a screenwriter. I'm not going to ask you to read what I've written, but I just wanted to make contact. It's funny where it's gone.
Yeah. Well, I think before we maybe get to Ronin, let's paint a wee little picture about you, JD, and how you got to the game of writing the film. So the first question we tend to ask is, what interested you in getting into screenwriting in your case?
I saw the movie Chinatown when I was 15, and I thought it was, I just went, who wrote that? Robert Town? I want to be that guy. And that really, that became what I wanted to do. Then I went to college, and I went to SUNY Purchase, where I teach now in the film program, but I didn't really I didn't want to go to the film school. I didn't want to edit or be a DP, because I didn't think I'd be any good at it. I kind of wanted to write. So I crafted sort of a playwriting major. It was a very loose school back then. It still is now, but we didn't even get grades. It was an honors pass fail thing. And I created my classes. I had like 6 and 7 people. You could do any independent study you wanted. It was a very small school. I wrote a lot of plays. I decided I'd be a playwright. I optioned my senior project play. It was going to be an off-Broadway play. It was sort of out of left field. Somebody saw the senior project production. They were older. They were part of a theater group. They optioned the play. The night before rehearsals were going to start, the director was in an accident. He ended up in traction in the hospital. We lost the theater space since we couldn't leave. They didn't want to be dark. They rented to somebody else. And our backers went like, we needed a tax write-off. We were hoping to make money, but we at least needed a tax write-off. And they put their money in something else. And I was 23, and I was like, I'm going to be a playwright. And then, okay, I'm going to go, bust some tables. And off of that, I kept writing plays, but I played in a band through my 20s. I was still writing plays, but as different things happened, I started to think about screenwriting again. And I started, I read the Sid Field book, which was the only thing that was available. And then I read William Goldman's great book, Adventures in the Screen Trade, which was very useful, although it's less of a screenwriting manual and just sort of a memoir of his own time, but with really valuable screenwriting lessons. The Hollywood he talks about is kind of gone now, but when I came of age, it was what was there. So I did all of that, and as my 20s ended, and my band didn't become a famous band, I was writing screenplays, and I wrote one after another, and the first few sucked. Let me assure everybody, everybody's first screenplay sucks. Maybe there's the occasional one that was great. I have yet to see it, and I've been doing this a long time. And I've been teaching screenwriting a really long time. And it's a craft that you have to learn. So I spent a lot of time learning craft. I got a job working in animation. I sort of fell into it, and nothing ever happened with it. But the guy who made it spent like over $1 million of his own money. We animated a couple of episodes, but he couldn't sell it. I didn't know anything about business at this point. And one of the things I learned was like, don't spend your own money without having a distribution deal in place. Like, it's, is if you don't, and this was before, but right before, El Mariachi came out, and Reservoir Dogs, Laws of Gravity, all these films where people were like, I'm going to make my own little independent film, and then we're going to get rich. And all these people made movies on credit cards, and almost none of them did anything other than sit there, because it's, Robert Rodriguez is really, really talented. It's something you have to remember if you watch El Mariachi. Like, it's for $7,000, it's an incredibly well-made film, and so you got to be talented and lucky. And but I learned so much working in this animation project. I learned about storyboarding and just delivering on deadline. I found that I was very good writing to deadline, and I came out the other end of this 18 months experience where I worked full time, where I was then, unemployed as a writer again. But I had learned so much, and I had written a few screenplays, and now this was when El Mariachi happened, and I started to make kind of a living. Everybody had an idea for a screenplay, and they always said, if you write my screenplay, we'll share all the money that we make when no doubt we'll sell it. And I said, yeah, but you have to pay me. And I started, I had enough credits, and I had screenplays to show people that were, capable. Mm-hmm. And I started being able to charge $5,000 or even sometimes $10,000 to do it. And I think I also, one of the first ones I did for $1,000. I took whatever I could get. So it was like a hard scrabbling existence, but I was really continuing to make money as a writer and supplementing that with word processing when I had to, and I was writing more scripts, but now I had really gotten polished. Mm-hmm. And before I wrote Ronin, I wrote 2 scripts that got an enormous amount of attention. One was called Bad Karma, and I was going to sell it. I had an offer. But I fell into, before I was going to sell it, I fell into an agent. And for your listeners who want to know how you get an agent, I went to the right funeral. Like I went. It was actually a memorial service. But the father of a good friend had passed away. Her cousin was at the service. Her cousin wanted to produce movies, was segueing from something else, and I was hoping she would hire me for $5,000. But I gave her a script, and I never heard from her again. But for the blink of an eye, she dated a guy who found the script under the bed and called me up, and he was an agent. And he became my agent. And I had another agent who was a relatively big deal. But and again, you put your work out there, you show it to as many people as you can, and you make contacts. But it's brutal, and you got to keep slamming your head against the wall. And my first agent hadn't really done anything. I later found out that he was, the expression is hip pocketing me, like kind of keeping me in a hip pocket. And if something happened, then that would be great. Then he was my agent, but nothing happened. But when this new guy came on, he took the scripts that the other agent had, and I found out he hadn't sent them anywhere because he had to, when the new agent came on board, the old agent had to legally show him where they had gone, and they had gone almost nowhere. And even though I optioned these things, the Bad Karma and the Revenger, which was my Shakespearean Batman, I optioned them. They never got made, but they made me a real reputation. People suddenly I was this writer around town, and Bad Karma. There's a guy named Lloyd Levin, who I'm pretty sure is still producing, a really nice guy, worked for Larry Gordon, famous producer, Point Break, Die Hard, 48 Hours, you name it. This guy did it in the 80s. And Lloyd worked, he was Larry's top guy, like the guy really in a lot of ways running the company on the day-to-day level. And Lloyd loved Bad Karma, and my entire deal was negotiated. And my wife is pregnant at this point in time. And I'm making a hard scrabble living as a writer. And this was for hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the date ended and the deal was done, but we weren't closed yet because it was like 8:30 p.m. In the morning, they would messenger over the deal memo and we'd be closed. And then the next morning, they never called back.
Of course.
And at the end of the day, I found out that like somebody that they wanted it. And I this is what I kind of remember hearing, and you never know if it's true or not. Like, but that Ron Myers thought it was too violent, the script I had written. It was a very sort of the ilk of Pulp Fiction and Reservoir Dogs, but with a major woman's part. This was before sort of Kill Bill. Like, there was a gun in the woman's hand, a good few. It was one of the distinctive things about it. Anyhow, it fell through. I optioned it elsewhere, but Lloyd Levin was a champ. He hired me to write another project. But before I wrote that, I was angry, and I had 4 weeks, and I wrote Ronin. And I'd been thinking about it for a long time, but I had this 4-week window, and in anger, I wrote Ronin. But now I had been thinking about it for a really long time. So it's not like, I dashed it off in 4 weeks. I had a notebook filled with shit. And I had been planning on writing it. That anger became my impetus.
I mean, obviously we're straining towards sort of Ronin now, but I think you just mentioned that your film before sounded like a Shakespearean Batman.
Yeah. Oh, still maybe.
Yeah, like that sounds fantastic. One
of my favorites. It was called The Revenger in grad school when I was aiming to get a PhD, because I thought I was in the midst of all of this. I had been targeted towards the PhD until my screenwriting career hit. But I read The Revenger's Tragedy by oh God, it's not Marlowe, it's definitely not Shakespeare, and I'm going to blank. And it's not Thomas Kidd. Maybe it's Kidd. But anyways, I loved the word revenger. Mm-hmm. So I just created a character who is a highwayman, and he's kind of a celebrity. I had read a bunch of history, and I made all this. It made up whatever I wanted to, but I used a lot of historical fact as a kind of patina of truth, even though I was making up all manner of shit that's remotely not true. But the idea of it was, this guy's a highwayman. He doesn't know, he was an orphan. He doesn't know his own backstory. He was raised sort of by the church, and he was educated and taught to fight. He doesn't know why, but then he was supposed to become kind of a clergyman, and he just blew all that over and became a highwayman. And then one day, and this was how long ago this was in my mind, Sean Connery shows up on his doorstep and says, I was your father's man at arms, your parents were murdered, and now we're going to take revenge. And my hero, whose name was John Rake, says to Sean Connery, I'm about to do the biggest robbery of my life, and there's no chance, I don't even believe you are who you say you are. I don't care. This is the biggest thing, and I'm doing my job. And so Sean Connery signs up because he wants to keep this guy safe and close. And of course, the guy they're robbing ends up being the guy who killed his parents and so forth. It all connects. And the main female character is a young con artist named Mouse, who wants to get on the stage but can't because she's a woman. My hero needs a con artist. He needs a woman to play a part for one of the parts of what he's doing, and it all goes from there. And Shakespeare is a character, Ben Johnson's a character. I had great fun with it, and it got a lot of attention. And a lot of people said, nobody really wants, this is really great, we'll hire you to write something else, but Shakespeare, nah. And then after Shakespeare in Love came out, people were like, oh man, we wish we'd seen this before, Shakespeare in Love. I was like, yeah, you did, you passed. Even though it's a radically different film, but just the business works in sort of the broadest of possible strokes. Shakespeare as a character and a thing. Who wants to watch that? Oh, it was a great success, but now we can't do it because it's been done.
Right. And, with the development of Ronin, I believe I had seen blurbs that you kind of came up with the idea, or at least the idea sort of started to germinate as you watched or read Shogun by James Clavell.
And I encountered the word Ronin.
Yeah.
When I read Shogun, and I thought it was just the coolest fucking word. And I was 15, and I was just I read this 900-page book. It was kind of a task I set for myself. And I just thought the word Ronin was so cool. And I knew by then I wanted to write. And I was like, I'm going to use this word someday.
Okay.
And so that was the first genesis. The second genesis was an article in the New York Times about how the fall of, the Berlin Wall and then Russia, like the end of the Cold War, had put all these intelligence agents out in the field, including American ones, because we were downsizing. It was like, okay, it's all over. Little did we know what was coming. But there were especially like ex-Stasi and KGB, and from the other satellite nations who all had people in place for this, and they all had this skill set. And they led, and one of the advisors on Ronin, a guy named Mick Gould, who was in the British Army, he was in the Falklands War, and then I'm not revealing any secrets. He's been an advisor on movies. He gives interviews. He had a period of doing this kind of stuff. He was the advisor on Ronin. And he said that they called this kind of stuff legalized criminality. When they did it for government, it was legal, but it was criminal. They were breaking in and stealing stuff. They were kidnapping people, whatever it was. I don't know that he kidnapped anybody, but stealing of stuff was absolutely. So it was legalized criminality. And now all these guys who had been doing what their governments considered legalized criminality, they'd been cut loose. So the only thing that remained was criminality. And they could make a living being bodyguards, but also, being mercenaries, except instead of looking for wars, doing all manner of stuff. Becoming gangsters, or a kind of gangster, and a whole new species of world was just being created. That it's easier to see in hindsight, like places like Blackwater coming to exist. And I'm sure Halliburton already existed, but the creation of sort of security for sale as a business, both legitimate with real multinationals, which again, how they exist outside of a lot of the parameters of law a lot of the time, but and then really freelance people. And at that point, when I saw that article, I went, "Ooh, those are my Ronin." And that was still a little ways before I wrote this.
Okay.
You said earlier about sort of luck in Hollywood, and it's one thing that we've noticed when we've spoken to screenwriters in the past, that sometimes lightning just strikes and magic happens. And I think this, and you look at these moments in your career leading up to writing Ronin, where you found these nuggets of stories that have come together. And as you said, you wrote it in a 4-week gap between two jobs, and so that is your lightning moment. But so what happened then? You wrote the basic script for Ronin. And then what?
Well, okay, so I again, and it wasn't even between two jobs. I didn't know what was coming next. All I knew was this, $375,000 up front, which would have been even that much more, was not coming. And I had a pregnant wife. Like it was, whoa! I'm making $10,000 a job if I'm lucky. $5,000, $7,500, catching word processing shifts when need be. I'm still I've been a working writer for a while now, but, and for the couple of years, and it seemed like shit was going to happen for me. I'd had a previous agent, stuff was percolating and I was making money, but it was, when you're, to this day, I still fuck it. Next week I'm unemployed. It's talk to an actor. They until you hit a level of success where you never have to work again, and I have never hit that level. It's that you're always worried about where your next job is, and over time, maybe at the end of this, we can get to the I've had, as any number of people do, the longer you're in a business, the more you're going to encounter a period where you're unemployed for a period of time. Mm-hmm. And then there was a point in Hollywood when, after the Writers Guild strike in 2007, I think it was, and then it was followed by, and that lasted well into 2008, and it had already changed the parameters of how Hollywood was acting. A lot of development that happened previously, where they would develop 20 movies to make one. Now it was like, we're going to develop 4 things to make one, and they're all going to be called Avengers. Right. It was a shift in paradigm, and plus the recession hit, and and movie studios were all owned by conglomerates who said, we're changing the way you spend money. And the paradigm changed. Lots of people never worked ever again. I had several years without a job. Like it was a grim time. I had a bunch of things that almost happened. Again, we're going to do it, and then it doesn't happen. You know, brutal things to go through, but they happen a lot. And then sort of, you know, the world is segued. Unfortunately, I've been busy again, but sort of, you know, steering it back to the economy of Hollywood at the time of Ronin, and, you know, kind of, you know, being lucky to speak to your point there. You know, you get lucky by putting yourself out as much as possible. Everybody I know who got lucky, it's almost always because they threw themselves out in so many places that they were available to get lucky. Ricky, the guy who Harrison Ford plays in the Jackie Robinson movie, the guy who brings Jackie Robinson into Major League Baseball, but who also started the farm system. He's a really brilliant guy. He had a saying, luck is the residue of design. And I really believe that. Like, you still have to get lucky because lots of people put their work out there and nobody notices it. And it's brutal. It sucks. And it's the risk you got to take to be a working, artist. But it's everybody I know who does this. They all put their work out there and they got noticed. And maybe some have it come easier than others. It didn't come easy for me, and the people I know, it didn't come easy for. But you put it out there, and by the time I wrote Ronin, that had manifested because I had already had an agent, and I had now, before I wrote it, I had optioned to, I had made sort of, 20,000 in 6 weeks, and my agent was going, "We're going to make more, don't worry." It was just, it looked good, it felt good. But then the Bad Karma deal fell apart. And I was like, oh my God, what if my agent never calls me again? Or if he'll call me, but nobody wants to talk to me now, or suddenly all this stuff's gonna not happen. But anyways, Lloyd hired me to rewrite a script, Lloyd Levin, and I wrote Ronin, and my manager, took that out. And he had gotten these guys to give me $5,000 just to write whatever I wanted. It was part of he'd optioned several things, and they were just maybe, I can't remember, 5,000, 7,500. Either way, it was write whatever you want. And they got to come along as producers. And the first time it got optioned, they got a nice little fee. But anyways, I wrote this, my manager took it out on the market. And at this point, here's this guy everybody's heard about. I was getting my moment of being flavor of the month. I was just hired to write a script for Larry Gordon, and this script goes out on the market. And a guy named Toby Jaffe, who I think still works for Neil Moritz, who does all the Fast and Furious movies and all manner of other action films. And Toby was working for a guy named Dan Melnick, a company called Indie Prod. And Toby loves my script, and he wanted to buy it, but my manager went like, and they offered a very nice sum of money, but not nearly as much as I was offered for Bad Karma, but far more than a typical option. Mm-hmm. And my then agent, who would become my manager, said, "This is not enough for him to sell it, but you can option it." And they optioned it for 1 year, and I would have sold it, but my agent knew what he was doing, and he sort of played poker. And he said, nobody else, this script has just gone out of the market, and they wanted to get it off by the end of the day. They feared other people picking up. There was already people calling about it. This was during the day when a hot spec sale could really happen. The spec market is not what it once was. Taking a spec out on the market, it wasn't ever a guaranteed sale, but people would just be worried that somebody else was going to scoop them, and somebody else was going to get it, and it would create sometimes insane things. So I optioned Ronin. My daughter was born. I started getting job after job. Now, Ronin was looking good. The guys were loving it. But then this company, the Indie Prod, left its deal with TriStar, and TriStar controlled my screenplay. Indie Prod had used their money to pay for it. And now their deal was ending, and Toby Jaffe was going off to work for somebody else. And now all of my champions were gone. And the people who were at TriStar were like, who's this guy? What's the script that we know nothing about? And if people leave, your project is always in danger, because other people, if it succeeds, the execs think that the other executives who developed it will get the credit. And if it fails, they'll get the blame. And that's actually in William Goldman's Adventures in the Screen Trade. And this is still true. I just had it happen a year ago, where an exec I was working with was fired and my project was gone. So anyhow, my script sort of just sat there then. It had another 6 months or whatever to go. But as the option was about to expire, and I've now worked it's been a very good year. I'm suddenly feeling like I'm only a screenwriter. I've done 3 studio jobs in a row. Everybody's been happy with my work. And the option's about to expire and people are calling. And my manager slips the script to Frank Mancuso Jr., who is the producer of the movie. And he had made a bunch of films, and his father was the head of MGM, which owned United Artists, the company that made Ronin.
Right.
And he had hired a woman named Lindsay Duran to run United Artists. She had been Sidney Pollack's partner, and she's still really respected. She is great with screenplay, a brilliant woman. And Rebecca Pollack, Sidney Pollack's daughter, was her second in command. And Frank brought them the script, and they loved it. And we had this great phone call on Friday, and Frank said to my manager at the end of it, and my agent had left his agency and become my manager at this point. And there's not a whole lot of difference between that. Managers tend to often be sort of smaller. They can get a producing position on a movie. There's some things they can do, some things they can't do. He functioned very much the same. This was a Friday afternoon. The option expired Monday morning. And Frank, at the end of the phone call, Frank says, so come Monday morning, if we call, this script's still going to be available. And my manager said, yes, but it might not be by Monday afternoon. Because there was other interest. And Monday morning at 9 a.m., they put in a preemptive offer and bought it off the table. So then it was sold. So that was sort of a whirlwind, but I wrote it in sort of August of whatever year I wrote it. And, I didn't sign the option agreement till literally the day after my daughter was born. Or the day my daughter was born, I think. She was in the hospital, and I was staying in the room with her and my wife, and I walked down and faxed the signature sheet back to my attorney closing the deal. So now, a year, it's a year later. My daughter's just over a year old. It's been a year and a half since I've written it, but now it's been bought.
Right.
And at this point, the next chunk of this time is first we're going to find a director. And actually, first I worked with Frank and Lindsay Duran and Rebecca Pollack on the script, and they were great to work with. I fly out to LA, and we would do this all via Zoom now, but there's no chance. And this was the old days. We'll fly you first class and put you in the Beverly Hills Hotel, and it was very nice while it lasted. And it wasn't something I ever got to get too used to. It didn't happen at all. I mean, it happened enough that it was really pleasant. But this was sort of the first time I had been flown out before, but this was on a Go movie, and it was just sort of a whole other level, or a movie that they were hoping would be a Go movie. So we worked on the script. They gave me notes. They were wonderful to work with. They took very good care of me. Everything I did, they liked. And eventually
Just what were some of the notes in the development of the story?
It's really hard to remember because like a lot of the stuff that we talked about, we want to get to the part where the script gets changed, because eventually David Mamet comes in. It became a less than wonderful experience for me, though I'm still proud of the film. And even at its worst, when I was really angry, my manager said to me, did the check clear? Next. Get over it. This is grown-up land. pull up your big boy pants and deal with this. Like, and you have to. It's a business. It's, you know, show business, not show friends. And it really is a business. You know, it's an industry. But you know, there was a scene that's long gone. I can talk about why this scene is long gone in a moment. And part of it was I was very influenced by, like, you know, John Woo films when I wrote this. And that had led me to, you know, Melville's French films, you know, the Le Samurai, which totally influenced The Killer. I mean, completely. There's so many similarities. It's kind of like a rewrite on some level. You know, and I knew all of these histories, and I knew I wanted to use the word Ronin. And I'd come up with this thing, but I wanted to make it a sort of John Woo film. And one of the things I did was write a scene where Jean Reno took the De Niro character into a video store where an expat American who I wanted to be Jeffrey Wright, who had been in a reading of something I had written.
Oh, cool.
And so I knew who he was. And it was just going to be he sells like these pirated DVDs of like Hong Kong action films that the locals don't even know anything about. But meanwhile, he's really an information broker. This is his cover. And they talk sort of in the code of movies. There's an Irish production company setting up shop over here. You know, a Russian film company's just come in. I hear they're trying to make a deal, but nobody knows for sure. And Lindsay Duran loved that. She made me like, I want more of this. And it was funny because when we did go into De Niro's office, one of the execs who worked there was like, I have a real problem with this. It doesn't seem to me to be real. And I'm like, real? It's a fucking fantasy. It's now, I didn't, of course, say that. I feared being, I'm in a room with a movie star and John Frankenheimer, who is this great famous director. And before we got into this room, we had to get Frankenheimer on board. And the first thing we did was show the script to Alfonso Cuarón, who had just finished making The Little Princess. He had just finished making Great Expectations. And he was sort of exhausted. I don't even know if it had come out yet, but he had also made A Little Princess, which is a staggeringly beautiful film.
Yeah.
I thought that Great Expectations, for the way he talked about it, I didn't go into such detail. I think he was a little exhausted by the whole experience. I don't think he loved the studio experience on that. He was always a very polite guy. But he passed on Ronin, but he hired me to write something else. He said, I really like the script. I just wasn't ready to get back to work. And then at one point later, as we were working, he said, I wish I directed Ronin. And by then I was like, me too. Because John came on, and John was a brilliant guy. And when I met him, he was sort of the next choice. And we sat down in a restaurant. I think it was Dan Tana's in Los Angeles. It's a place with like caricatures on the walls, like truly old Los Angeles. I think it's still there. I don't know if it survived the pandemic. I haven't been back since the pandemic. I was there right before, and it was still there. We sat down with Frank, and we had a really good dinner. And the first thing John said to me was, I come from the age of live television, and the writer was king, so you can trust me. And then we began this process. And now he pushed for more realism. He understood what I was doing. And so we worked, and he had some very good ideas. And it just cinematically, he was so sharp. And one of the things he taught me that's one of the best things I've ever learned is, like, if you have people sitting in a room talking about what they're going to do, flash cut to them talking. Don't just go like, we're going to be over here with the armored car. Flash forward, see that armored car, then cut back. Create a sequence out of it so that they talk, you cut, you talk, you cut. And by the end of the time they're talking, you're up where the sequence is about to begin, and you slam right into it. And that really is screenwriting. That's writing with the camera, which often means having dialogue, but learning how to write sort of shot language. And if anybody wants an example of this, go find, like old Walter Hill scripts on the internet. One of my old students just sent me a script for Hard Times, a movie with Charles Bronson, this action film, and he doesn't even use INTs and EXTs there. It's just sort of the main character, the character's name in capital letters. What you would call shot function these days in Final Draft. It's just shot to shot to shot. Sometimes the shot is Cheney's apartment. Sometimes it's Cheney walks. the locomotive steams, but it reads very well, and you really can see the script. I've heard that film with Jake Gyllenhaal where he's a photographer, Nightcrawler. I haven't read it, but I've heard the screenplay to that reads a great deal like that. Ronin's not quite. Ronin has INTs and EXTs, and I was fluent in screenwriter ease by then. But now I've been doing it for so long. I'm now so versed in all of the tricks that I know stuff that I didn't even know then. Like, I had learned quite a bit, and John taught me an enormous amount, and he was great to work with. And a lot of, we talked about character stuff. We talked a lot about action. He was a master of action, and we ended up in pre-production. And we still didn't have an actor. We were De Niro was circling us. You could say we were circling him, but it was, if he wanted to do it, that he was going to do it. But Frankenheimer got over, and he was already doing pre-production, and he had me fly over right as De Niro was sort of closing. But he was already there, and I was stunned at how far into it he already was. And he said, "Hey, you got to get the studio as pregnant as possible. Just spend their money. And only in Hollywood can you be a little bit pregnant. But the more pregnant you make them, the more they have to make the movie to recoup the money they've spent. That's the idea." Anyways, I flew to Paris. Again, one of these wonderful, you have a Go movie being made, it's first class, and they're handing you a per diem, and it's everything is wonderful. And John and I are, along with the production designer, are driving through Paris, looking at covering the car chase, literally driving the whole car chase, stopping and getting out where there's going to be a shootout. We were in one of the tunnels where the cop car comes out of one tunnel and comes right by us. At the end of that was the Princess Di tunnel. The accident was like a couple of weeks before we got there, I think. And Wow. There were still flowers all over the place by the tunnel exit. And I was driving with John, and we're talking, I'm taking notes. And as we drove, this other tunnel came out, and a cop car glided like perfect tandem with us. And John and I looked at each other, and I went, yeah. And I knew what he wanted. I don't think he even had to tell me. But the cop car comes out, it flips. He added the part where they sort of drive around the wreckage because he was masterful with this shit. I think I said it flips just missing them. Something like that. I can't remember. It's been a long time, and I wrote 11,000 drafts of this script. One of which may exist on the internet. There's so many more. So at this point, all is good. And now we come back from this, and now De Niro's on board. It's on the front page of Variety and Hollywood Reporter. I'm getting phone calls from all over LA. I now really am the screenwriter of the moment. I've written a Go De Niro film. And we come back to meet with De Niro, and this is where trouble really happens for me, not necessarily for the film, but I come in and I fly back with John on an airplane, and I always want to be careful how I talk about John because he was. I thought he was going to be my mentor, and I do feel that he betrayed me. It's like when William Goldman says in Adventures in the Screen Trade about Robert Redford. I think this was a gutless move. John betrayed me because on the flight back to New York to meet with De Niro, we rode, we're together in first class. John speaks fluent French. He's talking with the flight attendant, and he's a very impressive guy. And one of the things he says to me, or I say to him, is he says, "Follow my lead when we go into the office." And I say, "Don't worry, I really feel I can trust you." He goes, "Yes, you can." The next day we walk into the office, and Frank Mancuso is there. Frank Mancuso Jr. is there. John shows up, and he says, "I have their notes. They're major." And we walk into the room, and these guys, they wanted reality, and I'd written John Woo. And John Frank and I have been working with me for 6 months. And at this point, we sort of, when they were like, "Why did you do it like this?" John started turning to me going, well, yeah, why'd you do it like this? And I wanted to go, geez, John, like the last 6 months that we were working together on this, I thought that it kind of covered all of it. But I kept my mouth shut. And till my dying day, I will say Frankenheimer sold me out. It was like, why'd you do it like this? With all due respect, this is high school. This is house painting. It was brutal. And I felt it was a complete betrayal. And I will say John Frankenheimer had a real history of doing this. He'd had to pay other people off in a lawsuit. And it was a tough experience. And that scene in the video story that's not there, that was their least favorite scene. And Lindsay Duran, who is a brilliant woman, look her up online, see what people say about her. It was her favorite scene in the movie. So, and by the way, big boy time. This is what they wanted. It's what they got. I rewrote things. I had a character called Swede, who Peter Stormare was going to play. He became Spence, who Sean Bean played. I wrote one more draft, and then I was gone. And I was gone for good. Like whatever it didn't satisfy, it really didn't satisfy. And I was gone, and it was brutal. I didn't sleep for like 3 days. And that was when my manager went, did the check clear next? And it really was a valuable lesson. I never let anything like this. And I've had tough situations like this again. Never bothered me like this ever again.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report.
Calling all agents. Independent podcasting, much like the spy game, requires considerable resources, whether it's research, equipment, hosting, or of course constructing a top secret volcano lair. We're putting out the call for your support.
That's right. As you may know, we've activated the Spy Hearts Patreon, home of our ever-growing lineup of Agents in the Field episodes where we decode non-spy films from your favorite spy actors and full film commentaries with more intel than a Basil exposition briefing.
Cam, what have we got in our crosshairs this month?
The holidays may be over, but it's time to catch up on our Christmas content on Patreon. We have reviews for Love Actually and Muppet Christmas Carol, plus a commentary for The Long Kiss Goodnight. Who needs Santa with a haul like that?
And if that sounds delicious, then become a true spy hard today and join the circus at patreon.com/spyhards. But before this message self-destructs, Cam, resume the spy jinx.
So what were like the major changes that happened once David Mamet came on? Like when you watch the film, what are the things that changed?
Okay, but here's the big changes. Like there's a bunch of different dialogue, but here's an example. I'm not going to remember it all. And by the way, David Mamet was one of my idols. Like the year before I met a writer, or 2 years before I met a Writers Guild dinner, and Sidney Lumet's getting an award, and David Mamet's there to give it to him, and I am in the bathroom, and he comes in and pees in the urinal next to me. I run back to my wife and go like, David Mamet just peed right next to me. I was so excited. And like he wasn't part. He rewrote it. What was said by John in the newspapers when I threatened to sue John, I don't know whether Mamet ever said it or not. I suspect he didn't, because John had a history of going to places, and I'll explain why in a moment. But the changes he made, mostly dialogue. Mm-hmm. Well, that scene by the river where they're going to buy guns, that was originally just De Niro and Jean Reno, and they were going to get a piece of information rather than guns, but it was exactly the same thing. It did exactly the same beat.
Right.
Exact same beat. It was, I had set it apart. John moved me to the river because he liked it. He was going to have a guy was going to get hit by a spotlight. I am sure I wrote that into a draft at least. And John knew what he wanted. He was brilliant. They wanted to take out a lot of the sort of more comic booky stuff that I had done and ground it in reality. But the only really significant change where they went to a completely different place was the final set piece was supposed to be in a French chateau. As structurally, it was exactly my script. Scenes were very much aligned, lots of new dialogue. But the last scene was supposed to go into a chateau. It was supposed to be more Seven Samurai, like these two guys against many. They were going to blow the fuck out of it. They had a chateau that they were using as a model, and they were going to film some stuff there, and then we're going to build the rest in a studio and then blow it up. And it was going to be fun. And that got switched to an ice skating rink, which, by the way, I watched and said, I have an ice skating rink in the mall in my house, in my town. The whole point of every set piece I had here was it's something you don't see in America. But other than that, lots was changed. And there I don't know how many drafts of mine are out there. I know there's one of mine that doesn't have the character Spence, but I created him as well. Stuff got changed. Plenty of stuff got done. Mamet wrote a lot of dialogue. Some of it was radically different. Some of it was just at that point when in the amphitheater, when Stellan Skarsgård has been caught by Robert De Niro, and he says, you're pretty good in the locker room, but you're not so hot when you lace up your spikes. My line was, you might have been, you might be one badass technical spook, but you wouldn't have lasted a day in the field. Like
right.
it ain't any different. I don't, maybe it's not as good, but it's, and I can't remember if I'm quoting myself correctly. I think my dialogue's not bad. Anyhow, but it got changed and I had to accept it. And it was grounded in sort of, they cut out my video store scene with my, it was what it was. I'm still really proud of it. There's a shit ton of me in it. All the double crosses, all the reversals, all the plot points are mine. The reveal of who everybody is, the woman changing sides at the end, all of found in, all the way back to my very, very original draft. So, stuff gets changed. I have rewritten other people. People have rewritten me. I have been in Writers Guild arbitrations on both sides. It's a business, and you deal with this and you move on. So,
well, I'm glad you see it with such sort of humility to the whole situation now in retrospect. And I was looking on like Wikipedia and saw some of the quotes that were from Frankenheimer and yourself, and I don't really want to get into that. People can look that up themselves. I more want to focus on what you did with this film. I think that's the important part to me.
Right. And in the end, I will just say one other thing to that. Frankenheimer was quoted as saying, we didn't shoot a line as like script, and I threatened to sue him, and he published a full page ad in Variety and Hollywood Reporter going like, JD wrote this movie. He gave me lots of credit. He defended me from baseless rumors, and we kind of patched it up he shook my hand at the opening, and that was the end of it. And I never saw him again. But it was what it was, and he was a brilliant filmmaker. He had his demons, but we all have our demons. And he was a brilliant filmmaker.
Well, one thing I want to ask about, especially with your version, and see if this is something that you came up with or was a Mamet creation, is the case, the MacGuffin. Is that?
Oh yeah, no, that was always mine. And I didn't want anybody to ever know what it was. And at one point they had me reveal what it was. And I was like, this isn't as good. And that Frankenheimer was like, no, we don't want to know what's in the case. Now, at one point when I wrote this, the floppy disk was just coming into vogue as a MacGuffin. So at the very end, here is one of the things I wrote that I still like. The briefcase is on Stellan Skarsgård's arm. He's got Natasha McElhone, his poster. None of this happened. He's got a gun to her head. He's holding her, and the briefcase is wired to explode if anybody other than Stellan Skarsgård opens it. And De Niro can kill Stellan Skarsgård, but he can't say that for sure. She dies, and so instead he shoots the briefcase off his wrist, and it's going to open. And if Stellan Skarsgård fumbles, and again, I'm using, I can't remember their names anymore. Deirdre and Seamus. As Seamus was supposed to, because none of them were, only De Niro was on board at this point. All the rest of them came later. But it's not Seamus either. It's Gregor. As Gregor reaches for the case, Deirdre has enough sense. They were by the lake of the chateau. It looked like, I had said it's a mini Versailles, and they found a place that looked like Versailles. It had a lake. She was supposed to have enough sense to dive into the lake and get under the water so that the explosion at ground level, was going to go up and and she was going to go down, and it kills Gregor. And we didn't, up until this point, you don't know what it is. And as the case opens, for 1 second, you were supposed to see a floppy disk, and then it was going to be integrated. And I thought that was fun. You see the MacGuffin, but you never find out what's on it. And at one point, they made me have it get saved, and then it was like then they made me come up with what was on it, which was like all the soft money in the world. And then John came in and said, "It's best if we never find out."
We were inundated on Twitter with just questions about what's in the box. People just putting the gift from Seven. What's in the box?
I never cared what it was. I only cared about my Ronin. So, like, I don't know because neither did they. They're
just warriors for hire.
Their job was to just come through alive. Although in the end, De Niro's character is, not a warrior for hire. He's undercover, which was a twist that was also in my script.
Well, speaking of characters as well, and you mentioned Spence, and that was your creation. One question came up a couple of times was just about that sort of. He appears at the start, and then he's thrown out because he actually has no skill. Was he supposed to come back in, or was it like that was the concept?
When he was Swede, and Peter Stamare, who's an old friend of mine, was going to play him, he was supposed to be working with Gregor during the robbery, and as in my version as Spence, it was still the same thing. And he threatens Gregor like, "Don't you fuck me," and Gregor acts all afraid. And as soon as Gregor has gotten the case, he turns around and shoots Spence. And he was supposed to die.
Right.
But that all that "don't I know you" stuff, that was supposed to be with Larry the driver. And it was given to the movie star because you give the movie star everything. But "don't I know you," that stuff from the early meeting. You notice Larry doesn't have much to say. He was supposed to be more annoying. He was supposed to be kind of annoying, and he was supposed to fuck with Spence, and Spence was supposed to hate him more than Sam, and therefore, in fact, I think that Spence was about to kill Larry when Gregor shoots him, and Larry's already hurt, but because Spence has shot him once, he's about to shoot him again and kill him. And Gregor shoots from behind, just shoots Spence on the back of the head, takes the case and drives off, leaving Larry there wounded but not dead. And then it goes to the very next scene, which is them treating Larry's wound in the room and wondering how they're going to find him. And we're going to find him through his cell phone. And then on it goes. So it's different, but exactly the same, except no Spence. And he disappears. And that always bothered me. And I've gotten that comment from a lot of people. I thought he was coming back at the end.
Yeah. Although, as people who talk about spy movies every week, we're so used to people disappearing and reappearing with a heel turn. Right. It's actually kind of refreshing in this film for the fact that he doesn't turn up.
And that's it. I think that in terms of reality, I wouldn't be surprised if Mick Gould said, "Hey man, somebody fucks up, they're gone," and they're just cut loose. So for the reality quotient of it, that's fine. He was supposed to disappear from my film as well at the exact same point, but he was supposed to be dead. So I was racking up more body count. It doesn't bother me overly. Actually, I kind of like it too. I would rather see him get killed, but David Mamet's a good writer. I don't deny. I mean, the stuff he did is good. I will say, I think it was Anthony Lane in the New Yorker said about the surgery scene, "I'd love to know if it was Mamet's idea or Frankenheimer's." I was like, fuck, man, that's so 100% down to the camera angle in the mirror. My scene. Mamet wrote one line of that scene. "I took a guy's appendix out with a grapefruit tuna," which I wouldn't be surprised if he got from Mick, because it's the kind of thing a real guy would know.
Right.
Great line, but every other bit of that is mine.
One of the things I'd read online a fair amount was that a lot changed with the Deirdre character. Was that the case, or is that kind of...
Yeah, she just got smaller. Nicole Kidman wanted to play the part, but she couldn't get out of Eyes Wide Shut. It was a big deal. This was when I was over in pre-production in Paris, we were waiting to find out. And Tom Cruise, again, I'm telling you what I heard. Screenwriter is always the least important person in the room, unless they're also the director or the producer. So, I'm telling you what I heard. And what I heard was Tom Cruise went and talked to Stanley Kubrick, because they didn't need her for much of anything. But Stanley wants you there if he needs you, and they wouldn't let her go. And so then it was like, and Gina Davis had turned it down. And Alec Baldwin turned it down. He wanted to do it, but I think they just had he and Kim and just sort of Kim Basinger got married. I don't know if their baby was born yet, but like, you know, he was in that mode of being close to home, and they might have just had a baby or might have been pregnant, whatever it was. He was just like, I can't commit to going to Europe right now for this much of my life. So we had De Niro, and we didn't get Gina Davis. We got we had Nicole Kidman, but then she didn't want to do it. And now it was, I know they considered Deborah Unger, who's a great actress. And then one of the really good things about Natasha McElhone is that she really is Irish. So like, they knew they were going to get the accent right. Plus, she is a great actress. But things got taken away from the character, I think. And I don't know, just I think emphasis got shifted. She was a little more important at times. If I'm not mistaken, I thought she killed Seamus at the. I'm trying to remember. Like, I think I gave her. Because she kills Seamus in the because Seamus dies before Gregor in this iteration. The Russians are there. The Russians get killed. Seamus dies. Gregor is last man standing with the case. And that's when Sam shoots the briefcase open. So I had let Deirdre. That's what it was. Deirdre kills Seamus.
Okay.
And instead, now that becomes Jean Reno's thing. And so, I always like giving the women, a big part of the action.
Oh, yeah.
And letting them vanquish one of the significant villains. And that got yanked out. And, it's always, it is what it is. And I'm still enormously pleased with the result. And I wish that John and I had ever gotten a chance to sit down and talk in more detail. The premiere was sort of too crowded other than sort of shake hand and briefly me telling me did a good job and him go like, really sorry about everything that happened. And just kind of let it go like that. I would have liked, because I really respected him and I still did. Like, the guys did some remarkable things on film. Watch The Train, one of the first real action movies with big action set pieces, like the bombing of the rail yard, like really big things. It's a really important film in my mind. Manchurian Candidate, Seconds, these really important movies.
Well, I'm conscious of your time, JD. So I want a couple of quick questions and we'll wrap us up. Firstly, I think one thing this film does really well is have multiple complex characters existing at the same time. And I look at some films these days and can't even manage one complex character. So I think that's credit to you for putting that together and having all of these different people have different personalities. Was that something you aimed for when you put it together, or was it more a star vehicle?
Absolutely. I had keep a notebook to this day. I did more journaling back then, and my journals are always just about my work. Like maybe once in a while, some aspect, I don't find my life so interesting that I need to pull it apart or talk about what I had for dinner. I just usually, I'm breaking down my work. I use my notebook as the way an artist uses a sketch pad. And I outlined Ronin, and I did so much work. I think Spike Lee journals like this. I read a Spike Lee journal, which was what got me doing this. It was very influential for me. Really taught me a lot. And I just, snippets of dialogue, and then Deirdre, been in the IRA since whenever, was expected to do this, was expected to do that, sees this as her opportunity to get out. Seamus desperate, but I really broke down, gave everybody an agenda. And I still do a lot of that. I always, sometimes I draw diagrams like who relates to who's on top, who's, who's the power person. Did you ever read Henry IV?
Yep.
In graduate school, my professor did his diagram where he said, here's Henry at the top, and he created a triangle, Hotspur on one side, Falstaff on the other. He said, Hal, ends up getting sort of equal portions of Hotspur and Falstaff. He's got enough of the warrior, honorable guy, although you don't see it at first because it's hid beneath the sun, as Henry says. But he's got enough Falstaff in him to balance it, so he becomes kind of the perfect king. I was like, whoa, that's a really interesting diagram. And I started doing it with my stuff, but with more characters, the diagrams build out. And in the end, it only matters that it please you. There's no right or wrong math to this. It's whatever you see the relationship being. And I just, for me, found it really useful. So I definitely did that with the characters.
I think it absolutely helped. And the other question I had, I don't know if Cam has a question as well, but is, looking back on the film now, obviously there was that unfortunate incident that happened with the director and the rewrites, but that's put away now.
Yeah, it is what it is.
It's all done. It is what it is, yeah. Looking back on the project now, what is your favorite moment?
Oh gosh, I think the surgery scene really is. Like when we watched it, the people around me were grimacing in pain. Like there was a guy behind us grunting with every one of the forceps clinking on the bullet. That's in the screenplay. It clinks on the bullet and then comes up empty. I was very proud of that. It played out exactly as I imagined it. And, so did other moments, but it was the most purely me of all of them. Because I had that scene before I wrote the movie. And it came to me one night. It's too long a story to go into it, but I thought of it. And I was like, I knew I was about to write Ronin. My deal hadn't even fallen apart yet on Bad Karma. I knew I was going to write the script. It came about differently. That scene it really was what I wanted it to be. Plus, the action set pieces are mostly very scripted, and they really fit the way I saw them. The last one is not mine, but although it matches what I wrote, I do think mine was more exciting. They drove an armored Mercedes through the front door of a chateau. John was looking forward to that. He might never have admitted it after the fact, but I know he was because he told me. I loved that scene in particular. I just, my wife knew it was important to me. She squeezed my hand, and there was a guy just in such discomfort behind me. I was so proud of that.
Nice.
I have to say, there's been a lot of stuff since then, but this was the beginning of sort of ear slicing scenes, and it was just if you ever watch Master and Commander, they one up me by having him take his own bullet out, but they even used the same fucking mirror thing. I was like, you ripped me off, but you did it really well.
Well, I did have one question. There's a couple different endings for the film on, the home video releases, the one obviously in the movie and then the one in the deleted scenes. What was your original ending?
They were in my original ending, and again, it was just them sort of escaping with their lives. Deirdre was still alive, and sort of they part ways. It's got so many, but in one, and this was the one they pushed me to do. It was dark, and we all agreed, well, we'll film this, and then we'll see what happens. But the idea was they survive, and they are now, and it was Jean Reno who ended up in the hospital. He almost sacrifices his life to save Sam's to pay him back. And he's in the hospital and Sam is not. But when Jean Reno is out, they're all in a cafe by the river, and Jean Reno is trying to persuade them to go into business together. And because Sam has sort of allowed this thing to be destroyed, so he thinks he might not be able to go back to the CIA. Deirdre knows that she can't go back to the IRA, and Vincent just wants to sort of go into business with these guys, a new team of Ronin. And a passing tug, one of those river tour things goes by, and a guy on it suddenly stands up and says, "This is for Seamus." And he shoots her. And the boat goes on. De Niro shoots back and kills him. Then he and, Sam and Vincent run, and they sort of get away. And, Vincent lights up 2 cigarettes. They light up 2 cigarettes much earlier in the movie. In mine, cigarettes were a little more important because Vincent always smokes and Sam smokes once in a while. And that annoys Vincent because he's capable of having once in a while a cigarette. And Sam lights up 2 cigarettes and it's sort of foggy. And he turns around to hand one to Sam. They've survived. Deirdre's dead. They know she's dead. And he looks around and Sam isn't there. And then he says, goodbye, Sam. He throws Sam's cigarette into the Seine. And as it goes out, the movie ends. That was my original ending. And that's kind of like the van. But we also knew all along that was going to test, like that. We said, like, I can see how that's going to test. So there was, we had different versions of a happier ending. So now it has a sort of semi-happy. It was always supposed to be bittersweet. Sam was supposed to sort of go back to being, the idea is these guys are loners. And I wrote so many different endings. I can't count. Sometimes the drafts were just minor tweaks, but like, let's work on the end. Let's do this. Let's do that. So I always wanted it to be bittersweet. Sometimes it was happy. Sometimes it was really bleak. Sometimes in between. I like the last scene and Mamet wrote it. I really do like it.
Yeah,
I think it suits the tone of the movie. And I wrote a scene somewhere in the umpteen drafts that I wrote that I think reflects it as well. So.
Well, I mean, I think on behalf of everyone who loves Ronin, including our listeners that have reached out to send in questions that we've mostly asked, so I'm glad we got the chance to do that. Thank you for the film in that respect. And before we let you go, JD, there's a couple of questions we ask every single person who comes on the show, and we can't let you escape without doing it. As we are a spy movie podcast, what is your favorite spy movie?
Whoa, boy, that's a toughie. When I was young, I saw The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, and I didn't even all understand it, but I remember Richard Burton getting shot at the end. I was like, well, that was intense. I'm sure my dad watched it with me on TV. I liked it. I didn't really understand it. You know, I might have been 8 or 9. I'm pretty sure I saw it on TV and not in a movie theater. I wouldn't have been taken to a movie theater for that. But then 3 Days of the Condor.
Yep.
Is a really, really great one. I'm trying to think, name some, because I've seen most of them. But
I mean, any of the Bond films, the Mission Impossibles, Jason Bournes.
I mean, I love the Bond films, and I really enjoyed the Bourne films. At one point, my attorney said to me, would you be interested in talking to Doug Liman about, have you ever read the Bourne Identity? Would you be interested in talking to Doug Liman? And I had just signed to work with Alfonso Cuarón, and I was like, I can't.
Wow.
And the thing I ended up doing with Alfonso, it was a great time. The studio was a little wary of it. It's way too much of a story to tell, but they pissed him off. We kind of walked away. Then they wanted to make it again, but by then he wanted to like really change it. And they wanted me to write it for the very little amount of money that I was owed, like the last $10,000. And he wanted a brand new script kind of, and I think he wasn't really into it anyways. I think he was pissed at them, the studio, for what had happened previously. And so it didn't happen, but although he was one of the greatest guys I ever worked with. So
okay, I think it's a good bunch of favorite movies there. 3 Days of the Condor is one of mine, absolutely.
So I was going to say, in terms of a movie that's not really a spy movie, but that almost goes there, Children of Men. It's not a spy movie, but there is a clandestine aspect to it. He acts like an operative a great deal. The government is involved. There are, in those sort of freedom fight, the various units, there's it plays like a spy movie. This just occurred to me, even though it's not.
That's a definitely great film.
I think I could hear arguments for it, to be fair. I could see your point.
It's not a spy movie, but I would say it's in the next ballpark over.
Mm. Well, you mentioned, of course, a love of James Bond. Is there any particular James Bond films that you're a fan of?
I mean, the very first Daniel Craig one I really, really liked. They got a little for me over much after that. I thought they were trying to do an awful lot. Like I am fortuitously the recipient of screeners during Oscar season. Even though I can't vote for the Oscars, I vote for the Writers Guild Awards. So I've gotten a bunch of those, and I'll watch them, and it'd be late at night, and I'm always like, I got to come back tomorrow. It's like there's too much going on, and they're really fun. But the very first one of those I thought was great. And in terms of the other ones, going back to probably one of the least appropriate ones at this point, where does he go to Japan? Is that Thunderball?
You Only Live Twice.
Only Live Twice. I really did, when I saw it, really loved that one.
It's a very good looking film.
It's a good looking film. I was young and very impressionable and thought it was just badass.
We're big fans of the film, and I think that's it in terms of the spy questions. I did just read something on IMDb today. Can you clear this up? Is there a future for Ronin?
It's always in development. I hope so, because I'll make some money. It's constantly MGM controls it. I wrote a pilot for it once. I wrote a couple of different things for it in different iterations with different people. Other people, like, people as great as Tom Fontana have taken a whack at it and not had their version get done. I heard the guy from Vikings was doing it, but that was like 4 years ago. I don't know. I wish they'd let me do it, but I have a series that I just set up with a company called Halcyon that makes Mr. Mercedes and Hunters with Al Pacino and the Mysterious Benedict Society. Mine's called The Analyst, and it is a spy thing. It's about a CIA financial analyst and they really have financial analysts who, where's China going to be with their military budget in 20 years? Plus, where's the drug money going? There's all sorts of money aspects. And this guy is one of them. He's burned out. His career was once promising. It's now gone. He's a functioning alcoholic. It's his last day, and he's alone in the office when he uncovers something that's like fiscal of nature, and he just thinks it's going to fuck his hated boss. And he ends up realizing he's uncovered something much greater, and he's locked on his floor. He can't call anybody for help, and he knows somebody's coming to kill him. And the only thing he can do is figure out what it is he's figured out, so that he has something to trade for his life.
Well, it looks like you just booked your return onto the podcast when that comes out. So
I've written this. My partner is Barbara DeFino, who produced, Casino, and she executive produced Goodfellas and produced You Can Count on Me and some 35 other movies. And she's my partner on this. She developed it. It was my idea, but she completely helped me with it. Gave me notes on every iteration of the script, and now we're trying to do it. Like it's hopefully it's just about to appear on IMDb, because Barbara just proposed. We were talking today with Matt Lowe's, the exec at Halcyon. So that's my next, hopefully, not wood, spy thing.
Awesome.
Well, there you go. I'm looking forward to. I'll drop you an email when I see it pop up on IMDb, and we'll be.
It'll pop up on IMDb sooner than it'll pop up anywhere else.
Right.
As things take time in this business. Anyways, I do have to run, but thank you guys so much this was a lot of fun.
No, thank you for taking the time to speak to us and chronicle the story of Ronin and set the record straight. So thank you very much, JD, for joining us.
Again, I will set the record straight as I remember it. I have done my best to be as honest as possible. This is an industry in which honesty is often in short supply, but the really good people I've met, like Alfonso Cuarón and Barbara DeFino, are always honest. So I've done my best to try to hold up to that ideal.
Great job, and big fan of the movie. I rewatched it last night for this interview, and it's just such a blast every time. So
Cool.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Take care.
There you go, folks. We're back, and we finally found out what was in that box.
That's right, a floppy disk.
Yeah. Are you satisfied now, folks? Now you know.
This interview was so much fun. And what I really loved was that not only did we get some arcane information on Ronin, such as, the earlier versions, which had the floppy disk in the suitcase, which, that's really fun. But also that, JD really took us on, a guided tour of 1990s Hollywood and sort of what it was like to be a writer during that era, where you had the whole birth of the writer auteurs, your Tarantinos and your Robert Rodriguez's.
Absolutely. It's firstly, we should take a second to thank JD for coming on. The guy is a professor now, busy man. He's jumped on the show to talk about his baby, which is Ronin. There's many scripts he created, not many that got turned into films. This is one of them, and he's very passionate about the film, and he wanted the right story to be told about it, because there was a lot of drama afterwards about who wrote what, who said what. I think this is going to stand the test of time as a document that will state exactly what he did, and I like that we got that from the man himself.
Yeah, because I feel like over the years, the lines have gotten very blurry about who wrote Ronin, because David Mamet, is the big name, right? Everyone knows David Mamet in the industry, so I think a lot of credit for the finished product of Ronin just got kind of pushed his way. So it was really great that JD came on and kind of cleared the record as to, what his original vision of Ronin was and what changes were made, between what he created and what wound up on the screen.
It's the same situation as Matt Charman, who wrote Bridge of Spies. Obviously, once Spielberg was involved, he wanted some polishing to the scripts. So the Coen brothers were involved, and they added quite a lot of like witty banter, dialogue to the film. But in terms of plot, in terms of structure, it was a really Matt Charman's film. But often people will look at that as a Coen brothers film more than a Matt Charman film. And really, it is Matt's film. And again, with this is really JD's film with some polishing from Mamet.
Yeah, for sure, because this was a passion project for him, something he came up with like many years before it actually became an actual film that people could watch.
Mm-hmm.
And just the passion he had in talking about his inspirations, watching John Woo films and things like that. And just like the way that like the film changed between the earliest versions of that to working with John Frankenheimer on changes before he left the project. Yeah.
Well, there were quite a lot of changes and different versions of the film and different castings that we discussed. But I suppose just to sort of wrap us up in a way, Cam, like what was the most interesting one for you?
I thought it was really interesting when he said that Alfonso Cuarón was an early pick to direct this movie. Because in the years since, Alfonso Cuarón has gone on to become like one of the all-time directors of his generation, doing movies like Children of Men, which JD referenced later in the interview. But also, 2 Oscar wins for directing for Gravity and Roma, as well as a couple others like for editing and also for, I believe, cinematography. So it's like, that guy is such a distinct visionary. It makes me really curious, like, what his vision of Ronin would be, because what wound up being the film, they went much more of a realistic approach to the material, which kind of plays to, I think, John Frankenheimer's strengths. But I would be very curious what a Alfonso Cuarón version of this would be.
When you think about like what Ronin is remembered for, which is like the driving sequences and the sort of grittiness of the life of spies post Cold War, I think a lot of that might not be there.
Yeah. You look at what Cuarón did with like the 3rd Harry Potter film, which kind of broke the mold on that franchise, and I think kind of creatively infused it with a little more life that carried it through to the end. And I would be very curious to see if he would bring maybe a little more of a, JD talked about how John Woo was a big point of reference for this material and kind of the style. I'd be very curious what kind of style that Cuarón would bring.
Well, yeah, I mean, the Frankenheimer version is very grounded and gritty, and I think maybe there would be a little bit more fantasy.
Yeah.
Not like, wands and witches, but just something that's slightly more hyper-realistic.
Well, and just think of those like extended takes in Children of Men. He could have done something really cool with the cinematography of Ronin.
Yeah, very true. I think to answer my own question, because that's what I was really waiting for, was for me to talk again. I was blown away just from the concept that Gina Davis could have been in this film. I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of Long Kiss Goodnight, but she's definitely got the chops to be an action lead. Nicole Kidman again as well. I mean, not that the Natasha McElhone character has a ton of action sequences. It's more like a love interest in a way in this film. Just to see what could have been done with a different actor and a big name like Gina Davis being attached to this film alongside like De Niro, Sean Bean, Stellan Skarsgård. Would it have bumped it a little bit more to that film being more popular? Like I even JD references at the beginning of the interview. I said like the smash hit, and I meant like on home video because it was well bought on home video. But again, it's not one of those films that you can say and everyone knows.
No.
Whereas I feel like it should be.
Yeah, and he referenced, Nicole Kidman as well, really wanting to do the movie and being unable to because of just her duties with Eyes Wide Shut, which was a production that went, I think, about 17 years, something like that. Like,
didn't someone else lose out on the role because of Eyes Wide Shut as well?
She had to pass on the Avengers as well. Yeah. That production was very long. Stanley Kubrick is notoriously fastidious about his filmmaking, and that movie, its production was quite long. But no, like, I am curious, as you said, like, what happens if you have, say, a Gina Davis or a Nicole Kidman in that role? I think Natasha McElhone is good in the movie. As JD mentions, she's actually Irish, so could actually do the accent properly. But at the flip side, I think once you cast Natasha McElhone, the studio wants a little less of her in the movie.
Yeah.
Whereas if you have Gina Davis and Nicole Kidman, she's going to factor into the action more. They're going to give her a moment. And he mentioned in the interview there was going to be a little more action for her, towards the end of the movie.
Yeah, and I think if we had that, maybe be talking about her character a little bit more. I can't remember the character's name.
Right.
Just goes to show. But there you go. Well, I mean, Cam, anything else you wanted to mention?
Yeah, when JD said that his attorney inquired if he'd be interested in writing the Bourne Identity for Doug Liman, but was unable to do so just because of other obligations to Alfonso Cuarón. That would have been really interesting, because the Bourne Identity, obviously Tony Gilroy was the primary writer behind that first film, but that movie very much changed the game for what spy movies could be. So I'd be very interested to know what JD would have brought to it that maybe may have been different.
Yeah, it would have been a completely different universe, I think.
Mhm.
It's hard to say because there's not like a wealth of his screenplays that got turned into films.
Yeah.
So I can't really like extrapolate what it would have been like, but it's nice to sort of go, what if? Because, as you said, Bourne really did change the game. Bourne lit the fire underneath the Bond franchise that resulted in Casino Royale. Maybe it would have been a brighter fire. Who knows?
Yeah, we'll never really know, but it's just one of those interesting what ifs that, when he mentioned that one on the show, my ears definitely perked up big time.
Yeah, and this is the really cool thing about doing these interviews is you get to find out little bits of trivia that just isn't out there. Like the bits about Nicole Kidman, Gina Davis, the original, what could have been the director. Also, just JD's connection to the Bourne franchise. None of this would have been known without these discussions, and that's why I love having them.
And just having that portrait of 1990s Hollywood and just like what it was like to be a writer at that point in time, which is such an interesting era and will probably never be replicated.
I mean, you get, is this around the same time like Shane Black is having scripts bought off of him for several million?
A few years before, but yes. Yeah.
Yeah. That story, is that Long Kiss Goodnight I'm thinking of?
Yeah, that was definitely one of them.
That always blows me away, that just like on a spec that just sends you a bunch of money and then you write the script. Craziness. Yeah, well, first interview of 2023. What a way to kickstart us. We've hit 88 miles per hour. We've seen some serious shit.
That's right. And how do you follow that one up, Scott?
Well, I guess the question goes to you, Cam. How do we follow that one up?
We are going to be tackling our first Tom Cruise movie. We have gotten your letters. We know you want us to cover Tom Cruise spy films on the podcast. So we are going to take a look at 2017's American Made. Sorry.
It wouldn't be Spy Hards if we didn't put a weird little twist on it. It just couldn't be Night and Day. It just couldn't be the Mission Impossible films just yet. Is there any other ones I'm missing from his spy back catalogue?
That's about it, yeah.
There's some people would like to say the Jack Reacher films. I'm not really sure they count.
We could potentially, if we're looking at Hitman stuff, we could look at Collateral at some point.
Okay. We're so glad it's happening. We hope you enjoy the discussion. So, your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to join us next week as we tackle American Made. If you like what you heard on this interview, please consider leaving us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. And do not forget to follow us discreetly on social media at SpyHards. That's SpyHards on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. But until next week, listeners, can you tell me, what's the colour of the boathouse in Hereford?